Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, let me welcome you to the Chetin Palace, to the 6th International Symposium on the Czech Foreign Policy. I would like to first excuse the director of the Institute of International Relations, who had to travel abroad, and he is unable to make the opening remarks or the introductory remarks, so that's why I had to step in for him. We are aware that in this Rush November season there is a lot of events that are trying to commemorate the events from 25 years ago that led to Europe reunification and to Europe's reuniting. And knowing that there is a lot of events devoted to this issue, we realized that we will have to come with some kind of a future-oriented agenda for the symposium, and that's what we tried to do. We tried to think about how to bring the lessons from the past, how to bring the best practices from the past, and how to create something new as the backbone for this sixth symposium. One of the most important lessons from the past 25 years of the Czech foreign policy is the wisdom of cooperative, stable and friendly ties with our neighbors, and extension of these friendly ties and cooperative mode of behavior to a broader regional cooperation, namely in the form of the Visegrad Group. The V4 might be going through a bit of a rough time lately, because the four countries do not exactly see the same way the challenges stemming from the recent Russian aggressive behavior. But under this political dimension, the V4 is live and kicking, especially in the area of defense and security cooperation. The second lesson that we could learn from the past 25 years is the firm recognition of a key and pivotal role of Germany for Central Europe. Germany provided an extremely stabilizing role for the region, and I'm grateful to say that one of the most important actors in this process, which is Konrad Adenauer Stiftung Foundation, Konrad Adenauer, was willing and ready to help us to organize the first day of our conference. And so I would like to warmly thank to the representatives of Konrad Adenauer Foundation that are here today. The third lesson that we could learn from the past 25 years is that we need firm, continuous and active approach by our politicians, especially in the parliament, to make our foreign and security policies sound and adequate to the challenges. That's why the Institute of International Relations continuously tries to not only to analyze the negative effect of shrinking interests of politicians in foreign and security matters, but also tries to promote a dialogue and to extend this dialogue to the political sphere. That is why I'm so happy and so grateful that I can welcome Dr. Karl Lammers, who I believe does not need much of an introduction. Dr. Karl Lammers served as a president of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. He is a long time deputy chairman of the Defense Committee of the German Bundestag, and many more. As I said, I do not think that Dr. Lammers needs much of an introduction, and I'm very grateful that this person, this political actor who really represents exactly what we need, a devoted person into this foreign and security matters, will be joining us here today. The second speaker, the first speaker, but second to be introduced, does not need much of an introduction either. It's currently State Secretary of Ministry of Defense, Daniel Koštova, who served as a deputy ambassador of the Czech Republic to the United States. who served also as a head of the Czech of the Czech MFA's defense department, and many others. I will cut my introduction short as much as possible. Actually, I'm just wrapping up. What I wanted to say is that the Institute of International Relations could not organize this symposium without a very generous support of our partners. In the first place, I would like to thank to Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. Second, I would like to thank to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that provided us with this fantastic setting for our symposium. Third, I would like to thank to the Czech-Polish Forum, which co-sponsored one of the panels. Fourth, I would like to thank to the International Visegrad Fund for its support for yet another panel. And fifth, I would like to thank to the Československá obchodní banka, who is a long-time partner of the Institute. Okay, I think I've said enough, and let me turn the floor to the gentleman to my left. First, I would like to ask Daniel Koštoval and then Dr. Karl Lammers.
Thanks for the floor. Good morning. I have to say I really would like to wholeheartedly thank organizers, Czech and German ones, and also partners who contributed to organization of this event, because the topic is, I think, more than topical and deeply important. I just would like to say that maybe I not really like the kind of a border between Germany and the Visegrad Group. I think for today's topic, maybe we should be speaking about Central Europe as a whole, because I see Germany as basically part of the full part of the Central Europe. Of course, Visegrad countries are having something maybe a little bit more in common because of the recent modern history. So problems in building new states and modern statehood are a little bit more similar than regarding the Germany, but I think the vision is to speak about the Central Europe as a whole. And before coming to a little bit bigger details regarding the Central Europe and the cooperation, I would like to say a few words about where, from my point of view, the Czech Republic is coming to regional cooperation. And I have to say that we should a little bit shortly look at the history. And for Czechs, I think it's a struggle for being part of the alliances or organizations based on the decisions of Czech citizens and Czech political representation. You know that till the very last moment, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire last, Czech political representation was actually intentionally deciding to be part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, because from security point of view, that was actually something which was giving Czech people within the empire sufficient security. In the end, the empire fell, and also thanks to Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, and the independent Czechoslovakia emerged, and that was once again based on free will of Czech political representation. But then, between two world wars, the construction of security for Czechoslovakia was actually not effective. That was the construction of two different systems of bilateral agreements, and we now today know that it was not functioning. And after the Second World War, there was a brief period when there was a strategy to be a bridge, not to be part of anything, but be a bridge, and we know that it was not functioning as well. And then against our will, against the will of the Czech and Slovak people, we were included into the Soviet bloc against our will, or based on the will of a huge minority within the Czechoslovakia, so against the will of the huge majority in Czechoslovakia. After 1989, based on our will and free choosing, we were able to accede to NATO, and I think there is no alternative for Czech security and defense policy than to develop further the credible NATO and credible foreign security and defense policy within the European Union. And based on this, we are coming to also to regional cooperation, which must be seen as synergical to our effort to have in the future credible NATO for the defense purposes and to have credible common security and defense policy for the crisis management purposes within the neighborhood of the European Union. And here I think we did in last few years fairly good job within the V4. I mean, we started to speak about defense cooperation basically before the Chicago NATO summit, and we issued some declarations. And today we are really trying to materialize those declarations, and I am cautious optimist that we will, in a foreseeable future, achieve really tangible results of those declarations and have really concrete and not only small one projects of defense cooperation. In V4 it will be EU battle group, which we would like to keep alive as something as rapid reaction unit also available for NATO. We were and we will be also part of the battle group, where framework nation is Germany. And here I am coming to Germany and how Germany, from my point of view, is coming to the game in Central Europe. The military cooperation and defense cooperation facing current deteriorating security environment, I think we must do more. Not only in V4, but in Central Europe as a whole, as I was pointing out at the beginning. It seems to me that, at least from Czech point of view, and maybe also a little bit from German point of view, I don't know, Mr. Lammers will say how he sees it. Maybe we were a little bit neglecting development of robust cooperative projects in defense sphere in last 10-15 years. I think we could have done more, because I see huge potential, and I see huge potential not only for Czech-German cooperation, but really for the Central European cooperation. And Germany is, in a certain sense, one of the key countries in NATO and very much in European Union. And for us, from our point of view, the Germany able and willing to lead the effort within the security and defense area in the European Union is a key instrument for the European Union success in global affairs. And we are not shy to say this. We don't want to be pushy. We don't want to be kind of a just following. We are ready to be leaders in different areas in this cooperation with Germany and within Central Europe. One of the examples how we approach the regional cooperation is that so-called affiliation to larger commands or larger military units in Central Europe. Our approach is to be affiliated with one brigade to the Corps headquarters in Szczecin, and one fighting brigade affiliated to Corps headquarters in German Münster. This shows you that our strategy is really Central European. Central European in a sense that it should help to NATO generally to be more credible and more capable. It's only natural that regional cooperation is a must in such a large unit as NATO or European Union. So our strategy is clear. We understand that we must honor our declarations with deeds and money. We were able to change the trend regarding the defense budget. So we will be definitely more able in the future to invest, and I underline that word, invest in defense cooperation. Not to save money, but with money we should have at hand to do as maximum as we can do together. One point which is important for the defense cooperation is the will then to act together. It's many times a sensitive moment because it's about political decision to go somewhere. It's about political courage to accept a mandate which is available for doing what is necessary. And obviously, if you invest lots of money in armies and defense, you also want to have those armies that they are able to act. So any international cooperation, be it regional or NATO level or EU level, this is one of the crucial points and one of the sometimes very sensitive points. And current security environment is deteriorating, and what's going on in Ukraine or what's going on in Middle East, those are only confirmations that the regional cooperation to bolster NATO and EU is a must. And here I see convergence in our region. Convergence in a sense that it's a very complicated world, and it's not one-dimensional as it was during the Cold War. It's really multi-dimensional, and countries at one dimension are maybe partners or potential partners, and in another dimension they are opponents or even parties, two different parties to the crisis or the conflict. So it's very difficult to navigate in those unclear and complicated waters. But where I see the convergence is that the approach of Germany towards those crises, and from Czech point of view, the Ukrainian one is very, very sensitive. I think the convergence of the political approach is here, and I see decisiveness on German side, and I see that from Czech point of view, it's the approach is adequate, and there is strong will to really not ignore the breach of the international law. And that's something which is important for the Czech Republic, and I think generally for Visegrad countries. And I think it's good political basis to develop even further the defense cooperation in the region. I mentioned that we could do more, and that I see the potential for doing more. We have already started at the level of the Air Force and the ground forces quite fruitful cooperation in V4. I mentioned battle groups, but also with Germany on a bilateral basis in multilateral contexts. And I see this approach with political blessing as the most effective. Because when professional soldiers are able to say this makes sense, based on general political approach to cooperation, we can expect the most fruitful projects and real cooperation. The current deficiencies are not the consequence of wrong approach or wrong strategy. Current deficiencies are the result of that we were not consequent, that we were just declaring and not really following with deeds. With the change trend regarding the defense budget, with the change trend in Czech foreign and security policy regarding the CFSP 2 or 3 years ago, where we really changed the approach, and today we see, and that's also the convergence of the region with Germany. Today we see CFSP as on the same line as the NATO effort, as we see it as one effort regarding what's needed regarding the security and defense. I hope that we will be able to produce in foreseeable future really tangible results, that we will see concrete Czech-German defense cooperation projects within multilateral contexts, be it transport, Air Force, or ground forces, or the training, and I understand that Germany is having a domestic political debate about the future role of Germany in EU and NATO regarding the security and defense policy, and I would like to say here that we will always support Germany to go as far as Germany is ready to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think these were very bold and open statements, and very encouraging statements. That we know that the road ahead will be bumpy, but it's worth of trying. So anyway, I'm very much looking forward what Dr. Lammers will have to say to this, and thank you again for coming.
Thank you very much, dear Mr. State Secretary Kostoval, dear Mr. Kozan, dear Dr. Werner Böhler, Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure for me to attend this conference today, and I'm very much delighted to have the opportunity to talk with you about approaches to the new security situation regarding European security and defense. First of all, I would like to thank the Konrad Adenauer Foundation here in Prague, and its head, my good old friend, he is a young man, but my old friend, Dr. Werner Böhler, and the Institute of International Relations, you, the Deputy Director, Mr. Kozan, for the kind invitation to the Czech Republic, as well as for the initiative of convening this conference. 2014, that is a particular year for Europe and in specific for our countries. 100 years ago, the First World War broke out. 75 years ago, 75 years have passed since the beginning of the World War II. Almost precisely 25 years ago, On the 9th of November, the Berlin Wall fell and the Iron Curtain was opened. And in this country, in this city, in this region, the Velvet Revolution was a milestone for the breakdown of communism in Europe. It was a key to that what led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. And finally, this year we are celebrating the enlargement of NATO 15 years ago, in 1999, 10 years ago to 4, and 5 years ago and to 9, as well as the European Union's eastward enlargement, including the Visegrad Group's joint accession on the 1st of May 2004. Undoubtedly, all these historical events had a decisive influence on Europe as a whole, and especially on Germany and the countries of the Visegrad Four. We all have a common history. Germany has a close bond and deep connection to the countries of the Visegrad Group. Gratefulness is the memory of the heart, proves the saying. I'm still very thankful for the decisive role that your people in the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, and Poland have played for our unification. Yesterday I had the pleasure and the honor to meet with the German ambassador, Dr. Arndt Freiter von Loringhofen, and to visit the famous balcony of the Palais Lobkowitz again, where the former German Foreign Minister Hans-Dietrich Genscher announced the departure of about 4,000 people to the West on the 30th of September 1989. 3 months later, the communist system of the former Czechoslovakia collapsed, and Václav Havel, one of the most remarkable statesmen that this country has given to the world, became president. I still remember my first impressive meeting with President Václav Havel on the Ratschin when I was newly elected member of the German Bundestag 20 years ago. I will never forget this remarkable person. Without the strong hope and courage of thousands of people in Central and Eastern Europe, the fall of the Iron Curtain had not been possible. Visegrad Group was established by the President of Czechoslovakia, Václav Havel, President of the Republic of Poland, Lech Walesa, and the Prime Minister of the Republic of Hungary, Josef Antal, on the 15th of February 1991. With the foundation of the Visegrad Group in 1991, a unique organization was established. Its goal was the integration into NATO and the European Union. The integration of these countries into NATO and EU has contributed decisively to security and stability on our continent. Against the background of the new security situation in Europe, now, after the dramatic annexation of Crimea by Russia, close defense cooperation, and I fully agree to that, Mr. State Secretary, what you said, between member states of NATO and EU is more important than ever before. It is decisive for all of us that we are ready and willing to defend any ally against any threat at any time, without long preparation. That means in a very short time. In this regard, Germany explicitly welcomes the further enhancement of the Visegrad Four regional defense cooperation. As agreed in the program of the Slovak presidency, which was approved by the heads of government of the Visegrad Four on the 24th of June 2014. Moreover, Germany is also seeking to establish further cooperation in the defense area with the Visegrad Group. Ladies and gentlemen and dear friends, let me speak about the Ukraine crisis and the new security situation. The title of this morning's session refers to the new security situation. And the question is, what has happened that a new security situation in Europe occurred? And what is our approach? The answer is very clear. The annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation and the continuing, and that is a very important point, the continuing instability of Ukraine have changed the Euro-Atlantic security environment fundamentally. What does a crisis in Ukraine mean for European security? It is more than said that today, 25 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, we talk again about dividing lines and spheres of influence on Europe. For me, this is not acceptable, that there are politicians in the world, in Russia, who try to create again dividing lines and spheres of influence. That is not acceptable. Russia is challenging the territorial status quo on our continent. The Russian aggression against Ukraine poses a serious threat to the post-Cold War order. It is aiming to rebuild its sphere of influence in the post-Soviet area at the cost of its neighbors, and in particular of those countries which have Euro-Atlantic aspirations. Russia's annexation of Crimea, its actions in eastern Ukraine, its statements about Russian minorities in other countries, and its flagrant disregard for international agreements have shown very clearly that we cannot take security for granted on our continent. Our security is challenged now by an not acceptable behavior of Russia's President Putin. Putin is willing to destabilize sovereign independent nations in order to pursue his geopolitical goals. For NATO and its allies, the Ukraine crisis became, and that is my full conviction, a geopolitical game changer. That is not only a bad weather period. I think it is a real climate change, a game changer. So there will be no return to status quo ante. What we see there is a hybrid warfare, disinformation, propaganda in media, intelligence services, so-called little green man, attacks by combatants without identifying insignia. Putin uses, or should I say abuses, his gas reserves as a political weapon. Supplying weapons and militants, massed thousands of troops on Ukraine's eastern borders, firing artillery into Ukraine. This is incredible, and it is not acceptable. How do we, Mr. State Secretary, and ladies and gentlemen, and dear friends, how do we, the West, react to the challenges posed by Russia's aggression? To give an appropriate answer to Russia's behavior towards the West, undoubtedly a range of stakeholders are necessary. NATO, European Union, OSCE, and the Council of Europe. As Vice President of NATO Parliamentary Assembly, let me concentrate and focus on NATO's response to Russia. The political reaction. When we look at the response of the alliance to the escalation of the crisis, we can note that NATO's reply to Russia's actions has been unified and firm. And I could imagine that that is the biggest surprise for Putin. And he didn't expect this. That the reaction of NATO countries and EU member states is unified and firm. I think he thought he can split us, and then he would be the winner. NATO allies have strongly condemned Russia's action as a violation of international law and a running counter the principles and commitments of many international commitments. United Nations Charter from 1949, Helsinki Final Act, you know this especially here, 1975. The Budapest Memorandum on Security Assurances, 1994, and the NATO-Russia Founding Act from 1997. He violated all agreements. In this regard, I welcome, you mentioned it, the statement of the prime ministers of the Visegrad countries on the 4th of March, it was before the annexation, and the clear condemnation of all action threatening the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. The prime ministers of the Visegrad Four referred to their country's own experiences. In Budapest, 1956, Prague, I will never forget this too, 1968, and Gdansk, 1981. Due to this historical background, of course, your countries are observing the developments in Ukraine with great sensitivity. And just 3 days ago, on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of the fall of the communist regime in Central Europe, the presidents of the Visegrad countries concluded at their meeting with Ukraine President Poroshenko, and they stated the March Russian annexation of Crimea was an aggression. That was a very clear statement of all presidents of this region of Visegrad. Thank you for this. When German Foreign Ministers Frank-Walter Steinmeier took part in the meeting of the foreign ministers from the Visegrad Group in Budapest on the 13th of March 2014, he clearly expressed that the concerns of your countries regarding Russia are European concerns, concerns of all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, a NATO summit in Wales on the 5th of September, focused on the response to the crisis in Ukraine and the alliance's relations to Russia in the future. The summit has primarily dealt with the questions: what is the appropriate answer to Russia's behavior towards the West, and how can we shape European security of the future? The answer of the heads of state and government was a combination of credible defense on the one hand and openness for dialogue on the other hand. Let me turn to the first point, credible defense. That means, first of all, short-term reassurance measures and long-term measures. I will speak about short-term reassurance measures. First was the agreement of the North Atlantic Council in April 2014. Military measures to reinforce the alliance's collective defense. In the last months, or in the last weeks, I visited all Baltic states. I was in Moldova, Georgia. I visited all these countries, spoke with my colleagues in the parliaments. And they said, please tell us that NATO's core business, collective defense, is in action. And I can tell you that collective defense remains the alliance's #1 priority. The validity of Article 5 is unbroken. Article 5, let me say so, is carved in stone. Or to put it in other words, 28 for 28. And this is based on NATO's strategic concept adopted in Lisbon. As president of NATO Parliamentary Assembly, I participated in this summit at Lisbon, when they passed NATO's strategic concept with 3 core tasks: collective defense, crisis management, and cooperative security. But now the main core task is collective defense. The second point for our credibility is intensified air policing in the Baltic states. Very important. When Russian military aircraft conducted significant aerial maneuvers around Europe. especially in the last days in October. Amongst other incidents, NATO radars tracked 7 Russian combat aircraft flying in international airspace over the Baltic on the 28th of October. Their Russian aircraft were intercepted by German Typhoon fighters from NATO's Baltic air policing mission. This mission is very important. Third, the decision has resulted also in strengthened maritime presence in the Baltic Sea and Black Sea through deployment of Allied ships. In ABACS reconnaissance flights over Poland, Romania, as well as more training and exercises. Since the 1st of September, Germany contributes the air policing with 6 German Eurofighters. Let me speak about the long-term measures adopted by the summit, and that is the most important part. And that is a question of our credibility, and that is what Putin is looking. How does NATO and how does the West react? The so-called Readiness Action Plan. This underlines the reassurance efforts towards our Eastern European allies and demonstrates NATO's preparedness to defend its territory. The agreement in Wales is very clear. We will create a very high readiness joint task force, a so-called spearhead, within the NATO response force, ready within a framework of 2 days. I will tell you a story. On the 12th of May this year, I was in Brussels, and I had a long discussion with the highest ranked generals. And I asked them, what are you doing if something will happen like Ukraine on the base, on the ground of a NATO country? How long does it last to send troops? And they looked and they asked for NATO response force. And they said, it will last about 5 to 30 days. 5 to 30 days to send the first 13 soldiers. And it will last 6 months to send 40,000. I think that is NATO response force. NATO response force, the quickest, and that lasts so long, and I think we have to change it. And so I went back to Germany and said, no, that is not possible to wait 1 week, a few months. Putin is in the Kremlin and laughing about this. So now we have totally changed this aspect with the high readiness task force. And I think this is very important. And they told me another story about Sapad. I asked them, what is Sapad? That was an exercise in September 2013, a simulation by the Russians of an invasion of the Baltic states. A simulation, but the Baltic states said, no, that is no simulation, that is maybe the matrix for Crimea. And they were able to deploy 80,000 soldiers in the air, on land, on the sea, and the NATO was looking and said, great, what they are capable to do, but they didn't imagine that that could be the matrix for Crimea. So telling this, I think in the last few months we have moved. NATO got a wake-up call, and now there is a clear reaction. I think that it is very necessary to enhance availability, deployability, interoperability, and sustainability. And the question is, do we violate with this Readiness Action Plan the so-called NATO-Russia Founding Act? There was a discussion in Germany. If we create such a high readiness force, do we violate other agreements? And there is an agreement of 97, you know, the NATO-Russia Founding Act. And in this you can read that it is not allowed to send additional permanent stationing of substantial combat forces. Permanent. So they decided no permanent stationing, but Mr. State Secretary, it was very clever, to make a rotation system. So they will rotate, no permanent. And then the second is no substantial combat forces. That means maybe a division, about 15 or 20,000. They decided 5,000. So all this, what they have decided, is in the framework of the NATO-Russia Founding Act. I think that is a clear message. We understood the wake-up call of Russia, and we react. And I say, as a member of German parliament, each week when we have parliamentary session, I ask my Minister of Defense, do you implement this? Are these not only nice words and nice documents, but what are you doing to implement this? And I think they are on the good way. The second point is openness for dialogue. Last week I had a discussion with my Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Steinmeier, and he said we must be open for dialogue. That's great. That is necessary. You must have opened the exit door for Putin, even if it will not use it now. And so he went to Kiev and to Russia, to Moscow, and our Chancellor is always speaking to Putin. Last time at the Brisbane G20 summit, she had a discussion of 4 hours, and I think it is necessary always to confront him with our convictions and with our thinking, and that he maybe should come back to the way to accept international law and not to violate this. So we have reached out the hand of friendship to Russia. I am now a member of German Bundestag since 20 years, and I know that we spoke and speak about a strategic partnership with Russia, no longer as strategic partnership. We spoke of a modernization partnership, and I think Russia needs it. So there were offers from the West to involve Russia. G7 became G8. Before, that was 1998, before the enlargement, 99. We created the NATO-Russia Council in Brussels. That was 2002, just before the enlargement, 2004. So the Russians were involved, they were integrated, and they could understand that NATO is not concentrated against them, but on the other hand, we want to involve them. But you know the discussion in Germany and maybe in your country too. Some people may consider this to be primarily a Russian reaction to the West, poaching in Russia's backyard, as the Russians say, or in the form of NATO's Eastern enlargement in EU's Eastern Partnership. Some people even go one step further, and that is a narrative, a story of Mr. Putin, and I listened to him when he told this in Germany, that Western leaders have promised to Mikhail Gorbachev during the unification process in Germany not to expand NATO. So they said, we had promised Mikhail Gorbachev no NATO troops on the ground of former Warsaw Pact territory. I can give you now here in Prague 2 clear answers. The first is from Mr. Telčík. Mr. Telčík was a former national security advisor to the German Chancellor Helmut Kohl. And he accompanied him on all discussions with Gorbachev in this time. And he said, nobody could or had expected that the Soviet Union would collapse in 1991. And these negotiations were 1989 and 90. And he said nobody had expected this. And now, but the best is now Mikhail Gorbachev for himself. He was in Germany a few days ago. And then he was asked, tell us a story of Mr. Kohl and you, and did they promise you not to move NATO forward? And he said, no. A very clear answer, no existing agreements between NATO and Russia, leaders of NATO states and himself. So I think this story of Putin is over. There was a clear reaction of NATO, no military option for Europe and NATO regarding to Ukraine, but several rounds of targeted sanctions. One might criticize that these targeted punitive economic measures have failed, but I think they will not fail. They are very successful, and I think they slowly impress the leadership in the Kremlin. The economic situation in Russia is not very good. And Putin made a very long and strong interview with the German television, and he recognized that the results and the consequences from the sanctions are very strong for Russia too. Maybe for our countries also. But I think those sanctions begin to have consequences for Russia, and I hope it will not only have consequences but also lead to a change of mood and of the policy of Russia. So what do we need? We need a balanced policy, a clear reaction from our side to tell him so far and not more. We need a unified reaction of all Western countries here in Central Europe and NATO and EU. And we need to keep the door open for Russia, as we must not forget we need Russia in an international framework. Russia is a nuclear power. Russia is a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. So let us try to find the balance with a clear approach that combines, as you say in Germany, carrots and sticks. Let me speak now a few words to what you mentioned, Mr. State Secretary. First of all, defense budgets. Reassurance can only work if we remain credible. NATO's strategic adaptation to the new threats has financial implications. Agreement of the NATO summit is to hold any decline on the defense expenditures and to aim to move towards the 2% guideline within 1 decade. But I think it is not only the input that counts, but even more the output. Military integration, you have spoken about that. We have long supported a closer military integration among the European allies so that our limited resources can be used as effectively as possible. Germany and your country, Czech Republic, have close bilateral relations since many years. The basis of our long-term military cooperation are several agreements between our countries, such as the German-Czechoslovakian Treaty of 27th of February 1992 on good neighbor lines and friendly cooperation, and the German-Czech Declaration on Mutual Relations and Their Future Development on the 21st January 1997. But these good relations are also reflected in regular mutual visits and consultations of defense ministers, state secretaries, and military leadership level. And I think we are on a good way. There are very close and trustful relations between our countries. So far, more than 400 Czech soldiers have participated in training courses in Germany, and there are also German officers who take part in the training at the Czech Military Academy. To further intensify our bilateral relations, the Czech Republic has presented a food for thought paper. I welcome this very much. Czech Republic is a strong supporter of NATO's framework nation concept that was presented from Germany to NATO, and it's actively involved in various capabilities areas. Germany is ready to cooperate closely with all 4 countries of the Visegrad Group and to assist your countries. I could imagine, Mr. State Secretary, different possible areas. You mentioned them. Developments, armaments cooperation, training, mission and mission preparation. At the summit in Wales, we launched the Framework Nation concept. As you know, the Framework Nation concept foresees the emergence of groups or clusters of nations within the alliance. And within these clusters, nations are greatly rely on each other's military capabilities and will jointly procure certain weapon systems and equipment. 10 nations, including 3 members of the Visegrad Group, namely Czech Republic, Poland, Hungary, together with Belgium, Denmark, Croatia, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Norway and Germany, signed a joint letter to the Secretary General at the summit, in which we outlined the areas in which we will intensify our cooperation. And Germany will lead one of these framework group. The concept will ensure a better match between the provision of multinational capabilities and NATO's capability targets. Concrete projects are now being elaborated on the basis of this concept. Slovakia has also shown interest in joining, so we hope to present our plans at the next NATO Defense Ministerial meeting in February 2015. I could imagine other areas of stronger cooperation. You, Mr. State Secretary, mentioned an affiliation, maybe of a Czech brigade, to the multinational corps Northeast Stettin, and maybe to the German-Dutch corps in Münster. I think that is a very good idea. We have to speak about this. You know that there is a plan of NATO to give the responsibility for the spearhead of the Very High Readiness Task Force for 2015 Germany with this German-Dutch corps. And I think a cooperation in this framework could be very interesting. Moreover, there will be two NATO's exercises, Crystal Eagle and Compact Eagle, in Poland next year. Compact Eagle serves as certification of the multinational corps Northeastern Stettin. And I could imagine, and I ask you, that the Czech Republic, Poland, Hungary and Slovakia will participate in these exercises, maybe as a Visegrad group, and to bring in your common interests. Regarding to the battle groups, I think I very much welcome what you said, and we will assist you in your preparation of the Visegrad EU battle group that will be ready for rapid deployment on behalf of EU during the first half of 2016, and you have announced that you will join in the second half, and Germany is leading the battle group again. I think that is a great idea and a very good opportunity to work together. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude that I think that we are living in a very in a time of big challenges. We all know that no single state, no single country is able to master the challenges of today and of tomorrow. So I will quote the ancient Greek fabulist Aesop, who said, "In the unity there is strength." We need unity, we need strength, we need a clear signal to Russia, we need openness for dialogue, but if we do this, I'm sure that we master all challenges. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. It was an incredibly remarkable and powerful speech. It just occurred to me that we tend to think in Twitter posts. If it was possible, I would like to send the entire speech in one big tweet outside to the world, because so powerful it was to me, and thank you for that again. Anyway, we still have some 20 minutes for a discussion, which I would like to open right now. So maybe let's collect 2 or 3 questions at a time, or comments. I would like to ask you to introduce yourself, because we have microphones at each table, and pose your question within minute or 2 minute time frame, so that we have more room for others. Okay, so the floor is open. All right. So
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am Jan Smetana from the Center for Security Studies, and I have a question for Deputy Chairman of the Defense Committee, Mr. Lammers. I would like to ask him on his opinion on theoretical possibility of theoretical European possibility to play a role of mediator in so-called Russian-Ukrainian conflict, because I think that European Union lose this possibility in the first time, since first day, because European Union didn't use its soft power for playing of this role as a mediator in this conflict, but European Union support since first days. European Union has supported strongly one side of this conflict, and I think that I am afraid that from the long-term horizon, European Union lost the possibility to obtain more benefits from the role of the mediator in this situation. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you for the comment, and Vladimir Handl.
Vladimir Handl, Institute of International Relations. I have a question to both speakers. One of the challenges is that any kind of political solution in eastern Ukraine will have to include Russia, of course, and it can't be a defeat for Vladimir Putin. Otherwise, he wouldn't accept it. So now the question is, yes, we understand the complexity of the situation. You spoke about NATO and the defense cooperation, very important. Do you see a growing role for the OSCE or OSCE as well? Because OSCE didn't, work very well so far, but OSCE is, after all, the platform on which Russia can cooperate with us. So is there a solution? And second point, how do we stabilize Ukraine without really tough controls of eastern borders? And if we can't control the eastern borders and can't help Ukrainians to control eastern borders, how shouldn't we help to arm Ukrainian forces to make them ready, to make them combat-proof, and yes, ready to defend their territory? So I see a dilemma there. Either we control the borders and help them control, or we should help them to be combat-ready. Thank you.
Okay, and well, maybe if there is, let's have a third question. If it's related to this broad topic, to Russia and Ukraine. Okay.
My name is Sabina Domaskina. I'm a PhD student of IIR at Metropolitan University Prague, and I have a question dealing with open dialogue. I have a question to Dr. Lammers. In your speech, you mentioned that open dialogue should remain one of the key priorities of NATO. However, while NATO and EU are playing a fair game, Russia is violating international agreements. It has violated the Budapest Memorandum of 1994 with Ukraine, and there is a huge gap between what Russia is saying about its involvement in eastern Ukraine and what is actually happening on the ground. So my question is it really possible to have open and, most importantly, fair dialogue between NATO and Russia? Thank you.
All right, so let's close this first round of questions. I marked the fourth for the second round, and if I can ask Mr. Dr. Lammers to start.
Thank you very much. I will start with the last question. It is very difficult in this situation to realize an open dialogue. You know that especially our Chancellor, Angela Merkel, I think she had 40 telephone calls, 40 in the last weeks. She had a 4-hour discussion in Brisbane at during the G20 summit, and the Foreign Minister Steinmeier is now in Moscow. So we look for a discussion, we look for exchange of views, and during doing this, we see that Putin makes promises and next day he breaks them. So if you ask me what is to do, it is very difficult to say where those discussions and where those dialogue will lead to. But there is no alternative to do this, as we have decided no military reaction. We have decided for for economic sanctions, but we know these sanctions are also a problem for our countries too, though we have to look for a political solution. And I think what we need is to start again and again the discussion with Putin, with Mr. Lavrov, with the representatives of Russia. Maybe they recognize that they made a big mistake which will lead to big problems for Russia too. What he wanted to reach is a bigger standard for Russia. I think he will totally fail, and especially the economic crisis in his country will increase, and so to keep and to remain this dialogue maybe will lead to a new situation. But you are fully right, it is very complicated, it is very difficult, but I don't see any alternative doing this. Seeing that they break the law, that they break international during our discussions, but we have to keep and to remain the same. Let me turn to the other questions, that is the Ukraine eastern border. I think what we have to do is to look that the Minsk agreement will be implemented. And today we see a violation, a concrete violation of the Minsk agreement that was signed by Russia too. They sign agreements and they violate this in the next days. And therefore we have decided to send drones to observe from the air what's going on the ground. I think they didn't start this now, but they have to do this. So I think we have not to trust what they tell us, as they sometimes tell this and do this. We have to control that what's going on at the border, and to stop sending troops and equipment, what they are doing in artillery, from Russia to the eastern part of Ukraine. So we have to do more doing this. OSCE, yes, that's right, that is a very important organization, and I think especially in this framework we can do this, and that was a plan, that OSCE is a leading figure in controlling an agreement with Russia. Maybe first of all the implementation of the Minsk agreement. We need a political solution, and we see the complexity of which you have spoken, and we think we have to do more and more to bring Russia to the point to accept this controlling of that what's going on at the border. And the first question was Germany as mediator. I think the Chancellor, Angela Merkel, she is highly reputed all over the world. She does her very best, and she is always speaking with Putin and the German government's foreign minister, with his colleague Mr. Lavrov. If you call it mediator, I think that is not an official task of EU. EU is doing now, I think, a good job, that we see that we have, especially looking to other countries like Moldova, Georgia, that we have to look what we can do to involve Russia earlier maybe than we did in Ukraine. As member of the German Parliament, I will never accept an influence of a third country to that what's going on in another country. All countries have the right to decide their way. EU, NATO, maybe Eurasian Union, what is Putin's dream. If they want to go there, please do. Nobody will avoid them. But nobody, and even Russia, has the right to avoid other countries to go to West. But I think we don't speak about a zero-sum play. Maybe it is the opportunity for other countries to be integrated in EU and to work and cooperate with the Eurasian Union. So maybe to give better information, earlier information at an earlier stage to Moscow, what it means to be member of the association treaty with Brussels, to get member of the EU. That is not concentrated against a third country, against Russia. Maybe that would be the policy of European Union, and once more, mediator. I think maybe that is not a good role, but Angela Merkel will do her very best to lead the Russians to a political solution in the Ukraine crisis.
Thank you. Regarding the eastern border between Ukraine and Russia and the OSCE, yes, eastern border, that's important to secure it. Not only from our point of view, but definitely from Kiev point of view. I think that the Ukrainian government was not so focused on what to do about securing the eastern border. We were telling them, do it, focus on that. I think the US government and many other governments were saying the same to Kiev government. Here comes into the game, I think, OSCE. OSCE could be, under certain circumstances, a first element to go there and create kind of at least monitoring what's going on there, because everybody accepts that that's the international border between Ukraine and Russia. I think OSCE is generally important, and probably if the conflicts and crisis will be will occur more often even in Europe, the relevance of OSCE will grow tremendously, because that's the so-called framework organization, directly derived from the UN organization and UN system. And as we know, UN system is basically the producer of international law. So the role of OSCE in that regard is tremendous. And I would stress two more key points regarding the OSCE. The OSCE is the banner holder, or how to put it, for two important things. One is that the change of borders in Europe is peaceful, based on the will of citizens, and that the human rights basket is part of something which contributes to how states are judged. And what's happened here, also thanks to, for example, Charter 77, which directly derives its existence from 1975 Helsinki Final Act. It's important that it lasts, and the Final Act gave ground to the opposition groups in Soviet bloc, and it's important thing to keep alive in Europe at least, or in Euro-Atlantic area at least, into the future, because that helps to advance the international law. So OSCE is important. OSCE is having, as UN Security Council, thanks to P5, certain deficiencies, but that's the reality. You need to have consensus, you need to have some other attributes for decision making. It's slow, it's tremendously slow sometimes, but mounting the momentum in those organizations is tremendously important. So I think the role of OSCE is there's no alternative, I think, definitely for Ukraine. So that's regarding the border and OSCE, and just briefly regarding the dialogue. I think there is dialogue with Russia. I think that's brutally straightforward, actually. The only thing is it's not conclusive yet. And there was dialogue during the Cold War times, and that dialogue was also brutally straightforward sometimes. So people are talking to each other. The problem is that some people put more emphasis on brutal force sometimes than on the solution through discussion and compromise. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for very open answers again, for very frank reactions. I have two more gentlemen on the list. So the first was here in the second row.
Good afternoon, Mr. Lammers. My name is Kamil Uvin, and I have a very simple question for you. First of all, thank you for your great speech. Please, as a military expert, as I assume you are one of the best military experts in Europe, can you please comment what do you think about Russian military operation not only in Ukraine but also in other parts of the world? As far as I know, Russian military equipment were seen near Swedish borders, and also at the moment where was the G20 summit, 4 warships were seen in the Coral Sea, Australia, eastern coast. Can you comment this? What do you think about this development? And thank you.
Or the gentleman at the far corner.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Jakub Janda. I'm from the European Values think tank based in Prague. I have a very simple question for both of you. If you could please comment on what are the latest developments with the warships Mistral possibly being delivered by the French to the Russians. Whether you see any developments and possibly any internal discussion between or among NATO member states, because it seems that this might be crucial as well from the political point of view within the European countries. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm afraid that we will have to close. I'm sorry, we kind of ran out of time. So let's focus on the two questions.
Yeah, thank you very much for the both questions. I will start with the last question regarding to Mistral ships. 3 months ago, I made a personal initiative regarding to NATO. I said it is not possible in this time that a NATO ally like France will deliver warships to Russia in this moment. I think this is incredible. And so I made the suggestion that NATO will lease or buy them, that so we will give the money to France and Russia will not get these warships. And if you know that a Russian general told a few months ago that if the Russians would have had these 2 Mistral ships, the Georgian operation in 2008 would have lasted 40 minutes instead of a few days. So for me, I cannot imagine that that a NATO ally can deliver those ships in this moment. And I'm a lawyer. If you say pacta sunt servanda, you can say the circumstances have totally changed. And so I think it must give an opportunity not to deliver them now. It was an agreement. I think it was from President Sarkozy in a totally other framework when we spoke about strategic partnership with Russia. And now I think we cannot speak of strategic partnership. We have a fully different situation, and I hope that those Mistral ships will not be delivered to Russia. A very clear position. You speak about the Russian military policy. I think what we see is very dangerous. We saw the aerial maneuvers in the last weeks. That was an increase of 2/3% according and regarding to that from the Cold War area and period. So a very increased number. We had no information to the civilian airplanes, so there were a dangerous situation in the airspace. And I think we cannot accept this. And the second point you mentioned was that he sent warships to the Australian coast before or in front of the G20 summit. And the reaction was very clear from the say, thank you very much for doing this. And they rejected this behavior. I think, and that I think is a good advice, we have to carefully look what Russia is doing. They increased their budget for 50%. And I think if you look to the equipment of Russia in the air, in the sea, on the ground, it is much more better than many, many years ago. So I think we have to be very careful. And let me conclude with the quote of NATO: Vigilia est pretium libertatis, vigilance is the price of liberty. And I think doing this, we are going in a future of peace and freedom, united and firm, and I think then we have a good chance. Thank you very much.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I would once again like to thank both speakers for their very energetic, forward-looking and frank approach. I hope that this energy will spread further because it's not only about speaking here, but it's about how to make things work in a larger setting. I would like to invite you for a lunch, and we will reconvene here at 1:30 p.m. and the program, as you can see, is very promising. So I hope to see you all here later in the afternoon. Thank you for your attention, and I will see you later.